Hello, welcome to another episode of the series about Camille Flammarion. Today, for our episode number 4, we have our dear friend Roberto Watanabe from the Spiritist Federation of the State of São Paulo. It is a great pleasure to welcome here today, Roberto. Once again, we want to thank you in the name of the Peace Group as a guest invited by the group to take part in this series, and of course to bring all your experience, your knowledge to share with us regarding this book of Camille Flammarion that is part of our series. So, welcome, Roberto.
Thank you, Munir. Glad to be here with you all again to this new series. Last year was about Gabriel Delan, and this year about Camille Flammarion. Thank you for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
thank you. Yeah, it's always good to get all these different authors and people who gave a tremendous contribution to the Spiritist doctrine, who are sometimes not known by everyone. So we are offering this opportunity for people to get to know their work and, of course, read the books and so on. So I'll quickly introduce Roberto Watanabe. He's got a degree in philosophy from the University of São Paulo in Brazil, and also a master's degree in business administration, and also a bachelor degree in business administration. So he is the president of the Spiritist Federation of the State of São Paulo, director of continued education courses, director of the Spiritist philosophy course, writer at the SOA magazine from the Spiritist Federation of the State of São Paulo. Just to introduce him briefly, if I forgot anything, please feel free to add or correct me.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so Roberto, I won't take up much of your time, so let me bring to the studio your slides and I'll hand it over to you. It's all yours. I'll be on the backstage, so if you need me, just say, and I'll come back.
Okay.
So yes, so it's all yours. Thanks, Roberto.
Thank you, Munir. So today we are going to study a new book from Camille Flammarion, which is God in Nature. It's a very large book, and so that we are going to present it in two parts. Today we are going to see parts 1 and 2, and next month you will see with another colleague part 3 to 5. Okay, so but today we will have an overall view of the book. So let's start by the introduction. In the introduction, Camille Flammarion gives us the intention of the book. So he says that the book is intended to represent the current state of our knowledge about nature and man. So we must have in mind that current state of the knowledge of the middle of the 19th century, right? Because that was about the time when the book was written. And so he says that it seems to us that only through the positive sciences should we pursue the search for truth. And he added that the man has by nature such an imperative need to establish himself in a conviction. Which conviction? The conviction as to the existence of a God. So what first of all, we must remember, you have already seen that Flammarion was a man of science, right? Since he was an astronomer, and so his main objective in this book is to prove something which is transcendent to science, which is God, right? So he intended to prove the existence of a God, but not based on some dogmas, but on positive sciences, as the scientist that he was, right? So that is he's a very interesting approach to this subject, right? Because normally we have the existence of a God proved throughout the centuries, either by religion, theologians, or by philosophers. And in this case, Flammarion his intent is to prove it through positive science. So that is what makes very interesting this book. And he says that any attentive observer at his time, of course, middle of the 19th century, can, but I would say that even today, that it did not change that much, right? So an attentive observer can appreciate in the thinking world two diametrically opposed tendencies. On one hand, uh, he had the chemists declaring that God's presence is never manifested in their manipulations, in their chemical manipulations. And on the other hand, he had the theologians quoting and reciting dogmas, verses about the God. So something that would not, let's say, convince a rational mind, right? So the rational guys were denying God's existence. That's what he's saying, right? And by the other hand, the man of sciences. And by the other hand, the theologians were, let's say, proving God, but through dogmas, which was and is still unacceptable, right? But to a rational mind. And so that's why he wants to prove the existence of a God through the positive sciences that he said. And then he said that faced with the panorama of a terrestrial life, we have sought God. No? And nature, interpreted by science, has demonstrated this in a particular way. So for him, um, science also proves the existence of a God. So in some way, even though the scientists of his time denied the existence of God, he's saying here that the science, because science studies nature, and it demonstrates the existence of a God. Why? Because God is in nature through the laws, the God that govern, right? All nature, all the phenomena of the nature. So. Uh, so that God is in nature visible as the inner force of all things, the physical law, for example. And therefore, he says, it's impossible to prevent progress from leading us all to a higher faith. So, some point in time, even the scientists would accept, right, the existence of a God. So that's what he's saying here. And such faith would be none other than the scientific conviction of the existence of God, which was something that he already had at that time, right? So what he expected is that in the future, in some way, at some point in the future, all the scientists uh, body would accept, well, such idea. And so then he present us, and he tell us that he would follow a general argument to prove such existence of a God, and he would do that in 5 parts, which we are going to see the first and the second, right? So in the first, he said that he would try to establish that force is not an attribute of a matter, as was the belief in his time, right, in the scientist area. But on the contrary, force is sovereign. Right? Sovereign is the directing cause of matter, and not the other way around. So that's what he will try to prove here. And on the second part that we also will see today, He says that you will see that life is not an fortuitous property of the molecules of matter, right? That composed it, such as life, right? Such living bodies, but a special force governing atoms according to the type of the species. So he's saying that, for example, the body of we as humans, the body of the animals, the body of the plants, for example, um, the compound of atoms or molecules that compose such bodies is governed by a special force. That's what he's saying here. So that matter by itself could not, let's say, produce even a simple plant, right? A small plant. And so that's what he's going to see, to tell us in the second part. Then on the third part, he said that we shall observe that there is something more in man than matter. So we have matter in ourselves, in our body. We have life going through our body, but we also have something more than that, right? So we have the personality of the soul, and such personality will assert its character and independence over the body itself, right? Because the soul governed, commanded the body. So that's what he's will show us in the third part. The fourth part, he says that he will show that there is a plan in nature, right? Everything that exists is not something that was came into existence by chance, right? But follow a plan, a general plan, and with a particular destination, a system of intelligent combination, he says, right? And then finally, all this is to get to the final part, right? The fifth and final part, which is to prove finally the existence of God. Actually, he is proving the existence of God in all this part, but let's say the fifth part is the conclusion. And he said that the fifth part will place us the most favorable scientific position, in the most favorable scientific position for judging the mysterious greatness of the Supreme Being, which is God, and the unquestionable blindness of those who close their eyes to convince themselves that God does not exist, right? Because he does exist, right? So that would be the conclusion of his book, right? So these last three parts we are going to see next month, right? With our friend Carol. And so let's start by the first part, where Flammarion study force and matter. And just generally, as he said, he, although in his time, scientists believed that force is an attribute of matter, he will prove it the other way around, right? So that's what he's going to do here. And then he posed us in the problem, right? He said that the century that he were living, middle of the 19th century, was was already described with indelible characters in the pages of history, because the 19th century and the end of the 18th century was the time of the scientific revolution, right? So Flammarion, like Kardec, was living such a very interesting time, right? And so that's why he says in his book that there, in such century, where monks and oratories in the past, right, were concentrated in walled cloisters. One can now hear the noise of machinery, the creaking of the gears, and the hiss of steam from combustible boilers. So the factories, right, were producing many things. That what could be seen in that time, middle of 19th century, instead of the cloister, right, or the churches and that we saw in until the Middle Age. And he says that the elevation to God through the scientific study of nature keep us in a situation equidistance of the two extremes. The two extremes that we have already seen, right? On the one side, those who denied God, right? Uh, and on the other, those who allow themselves to define simplistically the supreme cause um, based on dogmas, right? So that's why he says that he was fighting against the two opposing powers: materialism from the scientists of his time, right, and religious illusion. He says illusion because it's a religion based on dogmas, right? That cannot be rationally accepted. And he says that we think that it is just as false and dangerous to believe in a child's God from religion of his time, and by the other hand, to deny such the first cause, which is God. Right? So he will, let's say, work in the middle of these two extremes, right? And based on the on our rational thinking, based on science. So then he gives us a glance over the general process of the present day atheism of his time. So, which is the scientists of his time, right? The chemists, for example, that he mentioned, that he did not see any presence of a God in the chemical manipulation that they did, right? So he says that such atheists, they teach that matter governs the world and the chemical, physical, and mechanical forces are only qualities. So that was the belief in that time. And Flammarion tried to refute such a system, right? So, and then for that purpose, he said that it must be shown that matter is a slave. He says that symbolically, right? Is a slave rather than the owner of a force. So matter is not the owner of the force, but the other way around, right? Force is the owner of matter. And it says that the direction of the world does not belong to the blind molecules, which is matter, that constitutes such a world, but to the forces under whose action such molecules combine themselves, right? And through such forces, we behind such forces, we have the supreme laws, the physical laws. And he says that the general panorama of the universe will offer us a first demonstration of the sovereignty of the force and illusion of the materialists, which believe that matter is the sovereign factor, right? And he said that from matter, actually, we start from matter, then we rise to the forces that direct such matter, and from such forces we get to the laws that govern them, right? And then from such laws we reach the mysterious author, right, which is God, of course, right? And then in the first part of his book, he says that he will divide in two chapters, in two parts, right? Sky, and one he will talk about the sky, right? The heavenly sky, let's say, right? And then on the other side, he will talk about Earth, how the planet we live in. And the purpose, he says, is to establish it for astronomical laws, and and then from end here, non end, and then for terrestrial life, that the matter has never ceased to be a servile slave, dominated by the energy or force that governs such matter. So that's what he's going to prove here. That applies not only to the nature in our Earth, but also in the whole universe. So that's what he mentioned by sky, right? It's when we look to the whole universe. And so he started by talking about the sky. And he said that the contemplation of a nature offers to the cultured people undeniable, ineffable particular charms, because in the organization of beings, one discovers the incessant movement of atoms that compose them. So he started by looking at the nature in our planet, right, on Earth. And that's what he's telling us here. the organization of beings in our planet. And he said, now, the greater our admiration for the unfolding of a planetary life on Earth, the more extensive and applicable it will become in relation to the worlds that shine above our heads. So that then we go to the sky, right? We look above and see all the stars, all the planets, right? Um, Throughout the universe. He says, in the cenacle of silent nights. And these distant worlds, which are cradled, he says, in the same ether, which we spiritists says the universal fluid, which is such ether, they also are equally seats of activity and life, right? So, and we observe that the supreme universal laws direct not only our tiny planet, right, but also all these the worlds spread throughout the universe. So that's what he's saying here. And in the face, he says, of these indescribable movements that transport through the deserts of the infinite, this infinity of suns, because the infinity of stars, they are moving around through the universe with their planets around them. So each star with the planets are circulating around them, and all of them going through this movement by a force, right? So that's what he's going to tell us here, right? So he said that in the face of the submission of the celestial bodies to rules that mechanics and analytical formulas can trace in advance, who will dare to deny that the force governs, right? Sovereign directs matter? And so that's what he's asking here, right? Who will pretend to subordinate the force to the blindness of matter, right? So it's the other way around, right? There is a force, which is, in the case of the celestial bodies, in the case of our planet, which we know today, after Newton, Isaac Newton, that is the law of gravity, right? Which will make all these bodies circulated in according to such a law. So the fourth moved the matter, right, which is these such celestial bodies. And then he comes to our Earth, right, and he says that the force, such force, identically governs the atomic motions and the immense orbits of the sidereal spheres. So the same force that moves the orbits of such sidereal bodies throughout the universe is a force which governs the atomic motions in the small bodies that we see in our Earth, right? Although the law are a little bit different, he will explain uh, here, right? So it changes its object, he says, the force, right? Changes its name, because the force that governs the atomic motions is we call it cohesion. Right? So at his time was known as cohesion, and the the force that move the celestial bodies and even the Earth around our sun, we call gravitation. So it's well, different manifestation of the same force. Right? Science today are still looking for the unique force, right? That is on the base of the four general forces, right? Gravitation, electromechanical, weak force, strong force, and so on and so forth, right? So, but it's only one force, and such force obeys general law, and such laws has an author, which is God. So that's why here he is already proving the existence of God indirectly. And the laws of nature, he says, govern the movement of atoms in living beings, but also the movement of atoms in inorganic ones, right? So a stone, for example, a rock is an inorganic body, and a plant or a human body or animal body is a living being. So, and the same molecules pass successively from mineral to vegetable and animal, and then go back to vegetable to mineral. So incorporating itself into them, such molecule, according to the laws that organize all things. And so he asked again, right? But by what right then dare the deniers of the spirit declare the absolute materiality of the universe? Right? So what can matter do for itself without the force that sustains it? Right? And then he concluded, it is undeniable that then that matter is slave and force is sovereign. So see, he repeated this throughout his book, right? This part of the book. So let's go to the second part, because until now we have seen the movement of atoms in bodies and even inorganic or organic bodies, right? So, but organic bodies have a difference compared to inorganic body, because organic body have a life, right? So that's the issue that he's going to go through this second part, which is titled is life. And then he started by talking about the circulation of matter, and he says that the world is enveloped in great unity. No element is isolated, neither in the present nor in history. So everything is integrated, right? And then he says that what caused this integration. So one important factor here is affinity and magnetism, right? He says affinity and magnetism marry in the mysteries of the mineral world. So what he mentioned here as affinity was a term that was used in chemistry, right, at his time. Magnetism from physics. And today we would say an electromagnetism force, right? And married as in the mystery of the mineral world and created all the bodies, right? The inorganic bodies. But then we have a plant which is not inorganic; it's organic. And then he said that the plant rises passionately into the light. Right? Any plant which is in the dark look for the light, right? Because that, from light, the plant would have his conservation or his preservation, right? His life. And the earth turns its morning face to the sun, Flammarion said, right? And in the atmosphere, 1,000 ripples crisscross each other, waves, right? So we could imagine as electromagnetic waves, right? Crisscross each other, 1,000 varieties of forces combined. And the result of all this movement is life. So then we have life, right? And life, quite truly, he says, is the great attraction of nature. The life of all terrestrial beings, men, animals, and plants, is one and is subjected to the same system, having the air as its environment and the soil as its base, you know, for all of us, men, animals, and plants. And this such universal life is nothing but a constant exchange of matter, right? Because our body itself is changing matter, right? All the time. We usually say that our body renovates itself for about every 7 years, more or less, right? So matter is constantly exchanging in our body and all the other organic bodies. And the purely materialistic hypothesis of life does not explain growth nor life, nor decay, senescence, and death. And he said that to be for there to be balance, for there to be organization in the agency of the molecules, there needs to be direction. But he asks, how can we conceive of steering without a motive power? Right? So, without admitting an organic, typical, vital force, which is the force which directs the composition of organic bodies, how can we explain the construction of the body? Right? So that's what he's asking here. And he said that nowhere did the most rudimentary plant or the tiniest animal arise from the concurrence of chemical affinities. So we know that in a chemical laboratory, a simple plant cannot be built, right? Because a plant is not only a composition of atoms or molecules, but there is something more there, which is such a vital force, right? And that the chemists cannot manipulate. And so that's why he said that no matter how progress organic chemistry makes, it will always be held back by the impossibility of originating the vital force, which it does not possess. So and then they cannot build any living body, right? And so it does clearly demonstrated, Flammarion says, that the circulation of matter takes place only under the direction of an intelligent force. And then he says, we have reached the crucial point, and it's now a question of examining the origin of life on Earth. So we know already that there is an intelligent force or a vital force that organize the living bodies. But well, and then life, right? But what is the origin of life on Earth? So that's what his question here, right? So asking here. And then he said that we find in the ancient deposits of the Earth crust the trace of a progression in the organization of living forms. In the past, and millions of years ago, we have very living bodies, but very, let's say, imperfect forms, right? So that was being refined through time. And that's why he says that there is a kind of a succession of uninterrupted transmission of vital force between individuals. For example, when we are born, we have a vital force transmitted from our parents to ourselves, right? And then we also transmit such a vital force from ourselves to our children, right? So that's what he's saying here. That also happens in all the species, animal species, or even the vegetable species. And such a transmission of force forms in space and time a chain of which each species is composed. And whether from the point of view of circulation in the matter of living beings, he says, or from the point of view of the origin and perpetuity of life, he says, life is constituted by a unique and central force, which disposes matter, right? So that can be organized according to a plan. The issue that he will treat in the fourth part, plan, general plan, of which the individual must be the physical expression, as we ourselves, right, as individuals, as a physical expression of the human species, right? So, and then he proves that life had a beginning on our planet and started by more imperfect forms of bodies, and then that was refined perfectly through time, and then we have the bodies of today, right? So, but all these are commanded by a force, or a central force, he said, right? Which was transmitted from one generation to the other, and so on and so forth, right? So that central force or vital force is what causes the matter to organize inorganic bodies, right? And not matter by itself alone do that, right? That matter couldn't never do that by itself. So we are in need of such a, let's say, physical force or physical laws to command the organization of the inorganic bodies. in our Earth and also in the universe. And we need a kind of a vital force or central force to organize matter um, in the organic and the living beings, right? Which is in our case, we said, for example, that we, for example, as human beings, we are a spirit, an immortal spirit, and we have this physical body that we have today. We incarnate people, of course, and then between we as spirit, as this as a spiritual being and this physical body, we have an intermediary body, right? Which is we call in the spiritism the perispirit, right? The spiritual body. And we know through spiritism that such a spiritual body is the element that commands the construction of our physical body. So that the physical body that we have, which is such a composition of atoms and molecules, are such organization is commanded by our spiritual body, by our perispirit, right? So it is we say that the, the, the spiritual body form our physical body. So that's here we can have an idea, right, of what is such a central force or vital force that Flammarion mentioned in his book. Right? A vital force is also, we say, or vital fluid, or is such energy of life which circulated in our body, circulating in our body. Right? So we also utilize such an expression to refer to this reality in ourselves, right? But now in the what Flammarion is telling us here is something more general, right? Is the force that organizes all the living bodies. So that is the first and second part, right, of the book. And then in the conclusion, we will have an overview of the third to five parts, right? So in the third part, Flammarion will be talking about the soul because he started by the inorganic bodies, then to the organic bodies, which gives where we come to life, to living bodies. And then he said that, well, beyond such living bodies, there is something more, right? Which is the soul. So that's why we've seen the third part. He says that the man is not only a compound of organic matter, right? So, and determination, which is our attribute, right, of the spirit. Determination, perseverance, courage, virtue, faith, they are not the attributes of some chemical cerebral composition, right? From our cell, from our brain, right? But there are attributes of the soul, which is something that is beyond such organic composition, which is our body, right? And on the fourth part, he will talk about the destiny of beings and things. So he will explain that there is a law of progress in the organized beings, from plants to man, and such law attests to the divine intelligence and evidences the constant presence of a God in nature, right? Through his laws, and never leading to the denial of a great the power of a God. Right? So he says that all the organized beings that exist in the universe, they have a goal, right? So they were created for achieving some goal, which in our case as human beings, we learn in the Spiritism that is perfection, right? Spiritism says that we were all as spirits created this simple and ignorant, and our goal is to reach perfection, and we do that by reincarnating many times, right? And um, developing our skills and let's say growing in wisdom and love, and then we reach perfection. So that is a general plan, and that is the same for the whole universe, right? All the things that exist in the universe, right? And the animal, for example, they also have a purpose, right? An animal the soul of an animal will not be just a soul of an animal forever, right? That soul also progresses, right, through time. So that's what um, Flammarion is talking about in this part. So all of this, of course, to conclude on the fifth part, right? Because such a general plan, of course, is the plan of God, right? So that's why he says in the fifth part that our God in nature remains unassailable, intrinsic, and universal force, right? So governing every atom, forming organism and world, uh, God is that uncreated light shining in the invisible world and to which souls are direct, because we all, as human beings, uh, reaching perfection at the end of the day is reaching God, right? So we as soul, we are directed in the direction, directed to God. We were created by God in the beginning, and we in the end, when we reach perfection, we will reach God. So that is the general plan, and that is where He's what God in His infinite mercy and goodness created all this universe, with a purpose, with a divine purpose. So that's what we are going to see in this book, right? And what's important to hear and to also to remind is that Camille Flammarion, as a man of science, as an astronomer, he will do that, which is prove the existence of God by demonstrating that the God is God's presence in nature, in the whole nature, and through the positive sciences, right? Not by some dogmas or dogma that say, well, you must believe in that, right? But by rational explanation. And, so that we could be convinced rationally of the existence of a God, right? So that's what he tries to do in his book here, and I believe he, he, he was successful in such a goal and such purpose. So that's what I would like to present today. And then in the next month, we will see the 3 to 5 part with our friend Carol Correa. Okay? So thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you, Roberto, for your brilliant presentation. And I hope those who are watching us, or those who will come to watch this video in the future, that they convince themselves how beautiful this book is. And
Yeah.
especially written by scientists, God in nature by a scientist. His approach is always of science,
Mm,
but he's got a background,
yeah.
from spiritism that gives him special lenses to look at nature and see, the divine presence, divine footprints everywhere. They are everywhere
Yeah.
because we are the creation, not just as spirits, immortal spirits that we are,
Mm,
but also our physical body and all the nature that we find around us.
yeah.
God is everywhere through the laws, through the beauty of creation.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And, once, and this book, if I'm not mistaken, it was written in 1866.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it means over 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And he has this perception in those days, where they were still trying to solve in the area of physics and mathematics and things that today they say, oh, we've moved so far from those difficulties that science had, or the challenges that science had. And the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, brought so many new theories and so on. So we have expanded so much in that. And today, we have all these spacecrafts searching for life everywhere.
Mm,
And what we understand as life
yeah.
basically from the physical point of view, of course, because the spirits, they tell us, that there's life everywhere.
Yeah.
But from the material point of view, and it's really amazing to see. And when we study astrobiology, that then we understand the formation of the universe according to what scientists understand today, the formation of our physical body. It's so beautiful. I
Well,
remember once watching the formation of the physical body, since the combination of molecules to form the DNA. The DNA is a mold that replicates and perfects itself as it
yeah,
moves along. And
yeah,
we can clearly see that there is something guiding that.
yeah,
It is
yeah,
a process of evolution, as you mentioned. The body evolves, but the spirit also evolves. The perispirit also evolves.
yeah.
So the perispirit of first human forms was different from the perispirit of us today. And ours will be different when we reach other levels of evolution in spiritual terms.
Yeah,
And we also see the combination between the material side and the spiritual side. So the perispirit being compatible and guiding the development of the physical body. For
yeah,
us, it's so clear, that so beautiful. And, your presentation was wonderful in bringing, certain aspects of the book, which I consider very important.
yeah. The spiritual body commanding the formation of the physical body, but the spiritual body by itself being commanded by the spirit, right? So
Yes, and evolving, all this evolving,
all
we
this involved,
see,
yeah,
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 all this evolving together
yeah,
is really, really beautiful.
yeah,
And it is, what amazes me is Camille Flammarion had this perception over 150 years ago. And when we see the level that our material sciences were in those days, we say, wow, he was seeing into the future. He was
yeah,
much ahead of his time. And that's why
yeah,
his contribution to spiritism is so important, because he sees what scientists see, but with different lenses, because he sees beyond, not just the material aspects
yeah.
of the physical worlds. You know.
And here, you would say that well, the situation of Flammarion's time is concerning the scientists, right? Which they had this very materialist view, right, of the reality. Uh, it seems that that did not change much, right, since that time until today. I don't know, except some spiritual scientists like you, for example, right? But I mean, in general, right, the majority of the scientist community. Are
Yeah.
they getting close to these such ideas of something beyond matter? Well, at least force they are accepted today, right? Which
Yeah.
govern matter.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
already accepted. But I mean, the existence of God, for example, right? So I believe that there is something that we they still must reach, you know.
Yeah. In my perception, Roberto,
Mm.
first, that old idea of God still prevails. People when talk about God, they see the old man. What we all grew up thinking that was God, the
Mm.
old man, and
Mm.
so on. So first, the idea of God is evolving. Some
Mm.
people perhaps they even believe in God, but not that God,
Yeah.
another God, which
Mm.
is the God that the Spiritism tells about.
Mm.
This force, this supreme intelligence,
Mm.
commanding everything, and whose footprint is everywhere,
Mm.
everywhere. And also scientists, they, on the one hand, in my perception,
Mm.
they have to stick to the scientific method
Yeah. Right.
to explain material things. But
Yeah.
to go beyond that, if you try to give your opinion about something you know very little, because you
Mm.
know a lot of this corner here, I
Mm.
think is not being scientist,
Mm.
because you talk about the things that you have investigated, you are convinced using the scientific methods.
Mm.
But these things, because God hasn't been reached so far by the scientific method,
Mm.
that
Yeah.
will come with time. We will develop the
Mm.
science that will get to the point where we say, yes, there
Mm.
is an invisible force commanding everything, that
Mm.
is everywhere, that
Mm.
is intelligent. But I think scientists may have their personal opinion about God, but
Mm,
they can't use their science to say that God does not exist. But I see that a lot. I see people who are very good in their areas trying to give their opinion in other areas that they know very little because they are good at one, science,
uh,
biochemistry, for instance. No, God
mm,
doesn't exist because I know how the molecule of DNA works,
mm,
and I know the mutations, how they can happen, and so on and so forth. Well, you
mm.
cannot prove that God does not exist with your biochemistry. So you
Yeah,
can't say for sure that God does not exist if you
yeah,
can
yeah,
prove.
yeah.
This is the main problem. But I think that personally, scientists are
Mm,
changing. They are bringing to us the result of their scientific research,
mm,
but they are keeping that area apart because they don't feel, and again, I'm saying that the
mm,
serious ones, they
mm,
don't feel confident enough to
mm,
talk about because they
mm,
don't have the scientific elements to talk about. So there is the language they use to study the material world, and there is a language that perhaps most scientists don't have to talk
mm,
about the spirit world.
mm. Yeah, I understand perfectly that scientists must restrict themselves to the scientific method, and through scientific method, you cannot prove God, right? Because a philosopher from the 18th century, which is Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher,
Yeah.
he used to say already that God is not something that the reason can prove. Reason, he said, not science. Philosophy cannot prove it because God is not cannot be experienced as a phenomenon, right? So like a physical phenomenon. So and then we cannot prove it by materially speaking, right? But what is interesting, Munir, is that before such scientists from the 19th century, we had Newton, for example, that discovered such a magnificent law of gravity, and he believed in God, right?
Yeah.
Einstein, after those 19th century scientists, also talked about the God. Of course, he restricted to his scientific method, but he had his opinion about God, like you are saying, right? That you believe that many of them have similar opinion. But what strikes me is that such scientists of the 19th century, and Kardec had mentioned that, all the Delane and even Flammarion, is that, for example, scientists of the 19th century used to say that, for example, thought is a production of the brain. Well, so that's very radical. No, that is
Yeah.
materialism, crude, a pure materialism. So that's something I believe it's something very radical.
It is. And if you ask a serious neuroscientist today, he says,
Yeah.
no, it's not exactly like that. We
Mm,
can't explain. I have a friend, he's a neurosurgeon. And once I asked him, can you
mm,
explain how the brain works just knowing the anatomy and the physiology of the brain? He said,
mm.
no, we're miles away from that. So
Ah,
I can't, as a neuroscientist, say for sure God doesn't exist, the spirit doesn't exist.
mm,
So prove me with your
mm,
science, your knowledge, prove me
mm,
that they don't exist.
mm,
You see, this is the problem. I think
mm,
most scientists in the 19th century, they're trying to break free from the explanation of the church. Everything, oh, God, God, and God, pure
mm,
and simple. No, that's it. No, it's God, and you can't find an explanation for that.
mm.
So they started to find explanation for material phenomena.
Yeah.
Then they said, well, so I don't believe in God because it's not your God who's doing this
Mm,
directly,
mm,
not the way you say. I
mm,
can't explain that now.
mm,
So the church is wrong, that God is wrong, and that was the only God they knew. But
mm,
today we have a perception of God. We've evolved a lot. We have a perception of God that is different. At least for us to be humble enough to say, what I'm studying is on a material level. I can't explain everything in this universe just by the knowledge that I have about physics or about chemistry or about neuroanatomy or whatever, I think it's too much of a pretension to, to be able to explain everything because I'm good at something, you know.
Yeah.
So, and today science is very sort of a vertical, means you specialize in something,
Yeah.
and that's something you go deep in that, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't see the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to have an opinion about every other aspect, something different. Before, because science wasn't that developed, it was, I would say, easier for those who were good scientists to know about physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, sometimes even administration, business administration,
Mm-hmm.
because they had less to learn, and what they knew was to a certain extent sufficient to explain what they could see and perceive.
Yeah.
But they couldn't imagine that in the 20th century we would have atomic physics at the level that we have today,
Yeah.
particle physics, and even astrobiology and so on. So that brings us a new reality. And then
Mm-hmm.
we see that what we know that seemed to be a lot is in fact not a lot.
Yeah.
A good example, at the end of 19th century, scientists with Newton, with the thermodynamics, with
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell and the electromagnetism,
Mm-hmm.
they thought they knew everything that existed. They had explanation for everything, all the laws that were necessary, the equations to solve the problems. They had just two tiny problems,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, well, it's just a question, a matter of time to
Mm-hmm.
solve them. And that's it. We know everything that we should know about physics. And that was at the end of the 19th
The,
century.
the
And we
paradigm
see,
change.
we know what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to solve these two problems, which were, about uh, the um, the photoelectric
Mm-hmm.
effect,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that you have sometimes the emission of light in certain wavelengths, and
Mm-hmm.
in other situations you have it, the whole spectrum, light spectrum being emitted. So they said, oh, it's just a question of adjusting here and there, and we'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to explain these two phenomena very easily. So
Mm-hmm.
with that came a new world in
Yeah.
science,
A
the
change of a
science of the
paradigm.
20th century. So
Yeah.
that's why we are not exposed to everything that we need to explain. We
Mm-hmm.
think we are. So
Yeah.
reality is expanding. Now we have this information about the depth of the universe. How are we going to explain these things? Things that scientists 100 years ago they couldn't even dream of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
You
that's
know.
why our perception changes. And
Yeah. Following our conversation, I'm reminding here of the alliance of science and religion that Kardec mentioned in the first chapter of Gospel according to Spiritism. So let's preserve our hope that such alliance between science and religion hopes happens soon, right?
yes, it will. People will understand, things in a different way. They will. This is the major, problem,
Mm,
because sometimes, we think we have answers to all questions, but then we are actually faced by a problem, and we
mm,
try to use our answers to solve them. We see that they disappear just like a
yeah,
drop of water in the ocean.
yeah,
So we see that no, my answer was not a real answer for the problem, because I
yeah,
didn't understand the problem itself. So you know and but this book is very inspiring, I would say, and thank you so much for your presentation.
no, I thank
Very,
you.
very enlightening. I just want to say hello to the friends who are here with us watching. Gigi, Saul Waters, our dear friend Saul, Elsa Hossi, always with us.
Yeah,
She is actually the mind that
yeah,
conceived these programs about Gabriel Delan, about first
Leon
Leon
Denis,
Denis, and
mm,
then Camille Flammarion, and
Gabriel.
Delan last year,
Yeah,
and this year
mm,
Camille Flammarion. Our dear friend Luciana da Conti, Mike. So hello from
mm,
us here. I'll just make some announcements before we go. So as Roberto mentioned, next month on the 5th of May, 7 p.m. British Summer Time. We will have with us our dear friend Carolina Correa from the United States. She'll be talking about God in Nature, parts 3 to 5. So I'll invite you all to be here with us to learn about the second part of the book according to our division here, because the book is not divided like that. It has all 5 parts, but because there was a lot of interesting information, we decided to divide into 2 different talks. One that we had the pleasure of having Roberto with us to present parts 1 and 2, and now 3, 4, and 5 by our dear friend Carolina Correa. We also have the Spiritist Center for Peace offers a online study of the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, and also the Gospel according to Spiritism. So every Wednesday, 12 noon, London time, you can join us. You have here the code for Zoom and also the passcode. So everyone most welcome to join us. And also to join us on Saturdays, we have at 10:30 UK time. Guilherme Dias, Charles Kemp, and myself, we coordinate this study of the Medium's book, and it's a very interesting study. So everyone is also welcome to join us. And finally, we want to thank Kardec Radio, invite you all to visit the site of Kardec Radio, the interesting work that they do. And I want just to send them our gratitude for allowing us to use the studio so we could bring all these beautiful books through talks to all of you. So thank you very much indeed. And that's what we had for today. So, Roberto, if you want to say a few final words.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, and was a great opportunity for me to read this book again. It's a very huge book, and it was a wonderful opportunity to revise all the issues.
Yeah,
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing with us, making this effort of reading again the book and bringing it to us in such a nice way. So I thank you, Roberto, and thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you
So
so
hope to
much.
see you all next month, the 5th of May, for the second part of God in Nature. For now, bye-bye.
Bye bye.